Welcome to the Wisdom of Jacob's Ladder. I'm your host, Jacob Cooper, best-selling author of Life After Breath and the Wisdom of Jacob's Ladder. For those of you who are new to my channel, please consider following us here and hitting that subscribe button, as well as following me on my new platform on mindbodyspirit.fm, where you can find the Wisdom of Jacob's Ladder on all major platform streams. Today's guest in the Wisdom of Jacob's Ladder is Dr. Linda Backman. Dr. Backman is a multiple author. She's a fellow clinician working in the mental health field, clinical psychologist, as well as fellow hypnotist. Dr. Backman is going to be discussing all things relating to past life regression and her groundbreaking work in soul regression therapy and what this can mean to better understand the soul and its different origins and its purpose here in this life. So without further ado, we bring on Dr. Linda Backman here on the Wisdom of Jacob's Ladder. Dr. Linda Backman, thank you so much for coming here on the Wisdom of Jacob's Ladder. It's a big honor to have you here as a guest.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, I've been a big fan of your work for quite some time. And I don't know about you, Dr. Linda, but, I go to events and I hear of names spoken at events such as Dr. Brian Weiss, Michael Newton, and your name is thrown out there as well, too, within these events. So it's just a big honor to have you here on my channel on the Wisdom of Jacob's Ladder. But for viewers who are not, necessarily familiar with your work, do you mind just briefly sharing about the current work that you're doing? And maybe we could get into unraveling as to what led you to this work, because it is quite unique, transformative, groundbreaking, and profound, I would say.
Okay. Well, I always say I'll attempt to make this not a long story, but a short story. So yeah, Jacob, I'm a psychologist by training. Prior to the early 90s, I would have labeled myself as a conventional psychologist. I worked with all types of clients, including grief and loss, but I didn't understand soul or reincarnation hardly at all prior to 1993. In 1993, I was in my middle 40s. I always tell it this way: I was minding my own business, doing my work and that sort of thing. Sadly, I had a very close colleague. We'd built a group practice of psychologists and psychiatrists. None of us were spiritually oriented in our group. And my colleague was in his early 30s. And in 93, my colleague transitioned, passed, died, whatever term people want to use, from a type of lung cancer. And when he passed, I started having experiences that back then were totally new to me. He was talking to me from the other side, and he was showing me past lives that we had shared. So, and this happened soon, days after his passing. So Jacob, I thought, what do I do about this? Is this real? Does this happen to other people? I knew what I was feeling. I always jokingly say, well, maybe I needed, meds or my own, psychiatrist, but, I knew it was real. So, and I have the sense, or I know that this was all planned at the soul level. So, my husband, who was then my husband and is still my husband, Earl and I have always been pretty liberal kinds of people. So, and Earl's not a psychologist. He's a, retired academic. So I asked Earl to sit down when this all began to happen, and I began to explain to him what was going on for me. And I honestly expected him to look back at me and go, oh my gosh, could you just forget about this and make it all go away? That wasn't his response. And essentially what happened was Earl looked back at me that day very calmly and said, okay, as I explained what I was experiencing. And honestly, I said to him, okay, don't you think this is strange? And basically, here's what Earl said. Of course, a lot has transpired in all the years since then. But Earl looked back at me and he said, well, here's why I'm saying just okay. Earl said, I guess I must have blocked out something that happened to me as a child.
Hmm.
And when I asked him what he was talking about, he said, well, only now do I remember. Earl said, when I was a boy growing up, he grew up out in the country in the state of Oregon. When I was growing up, he said in his own private time and space, especially outside, he would lay on the ground and watch the clouds move in the sky. And he said, I remembered my past lives in detail. And Earl said, I knew they were my lives. I didn't doubt that at all, but nobody in my life ever talked about such things. So he said, I just kind of pushed it aside and forgot about it and never spoke about it again until 1993. So
Yeah.
basically, Earl said, look, if you're interested in this, go for it. Go study,
Hmm.
go learn. I'll go with you. I don't have to go with you. And I know today that that was really planned to give me kind of an open door that if I chose to walk through it, I could walk through it, which clearly I did. So, yeah.
Yeah. Well, thankfully you did. I mean, you've been so impactful for so many people's lives and transformative. And I've noticed that a lot of people who've been on my channel, there's a correlation at times with these shakeup periods of our life with how they could allow us to reframe our worldviews. And it seems like your path and trajectories in lockstep with that type of phenomenon where you turned, a lot of grief and pain, as a segue to your own purpose and meaning, which is quite profound.
Yeah, I mean, I think that today, of course, as you would imagine, and probably a lot of this is similar for you. Today, I talk with my guides, quite often, and of course, we have free will, as I'm sure you know, and so I could have said, nope, this all scares me, and it feels like really weird stuff, and all my referrals that back then came from medical doctors, all my referrals will just go away. So I just better forget about this. And but I was too fascinated. I could almost feel this, not like somebody was pushing me from behind, but yeah, my fascination just kind of
Mhm.
pushed me forward.
Wow. It's kind of like when you try to push that beach ball down, no matter what you do, it just comes up to the surface. And with our purpose, it's like no matter how much we want to be normal and fit in, we're called to do something different. We have to honor that voice. Otherwise, it's going to harass us, bother us until,
Mhm, mhm.
we follow it. So thank you for tuning into that voice. Out of curiosity was, and I view the afterlife in a similar fashion to a courtroom where you're building the case that this is real, this is evidential, that this isn't a hallucination. For you, was there one particular piece that turned maybe a faith or hope or a belief into a direct knowing in regards to past life awareness? Or was it a couple things that you could share with viewers that might have been accumulation to your, conclusions that this
Yeah.
is real?
Yeah. I mean, here's a piece about me that anybody who knows me, moderately well, or even more than moderately well, I'm relatively speaking, I'm a pretty left brain person. So it's like I'm a why person, explain that to me, get, make it, get it to make sense. So I mean, honestly, in the first probably maybe 2 to 3 years, Jacob, it was like, can you really I mean, you obviously do this type of work yourself. It's like, can you really guide a client with relaxation? And obviously, as I always say to people, relaxation and hypnosis are, you
Mhm.
know, basically one and the same. Can you really just use these words and probably put your energy in a relatively, in alignment kind of place and guide your client to discover past life, their soul, why they're here, who their guides are, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, I questioned that for at least 2 to 3 years. So it was a slow expansion for me until a certain point, and then, I mean, obviously that changed, a long time ago. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, there's pieces of evidence, and it seems in a little bit in lockstep with Dr. Brian Weiss to a degree, where again, Yale trained psychiatrist, left brain as you're describing, had an encounter, I think with just like this beautiful female client that was afraid of the water. And, in his book, Many Lives and Many Masters, chronicles the pieces of evidence that just blew his mind to say, wow, this is real. Just her memories of drowning in the water, the interdimensional communication with one of his crossed over, I guess, children. There was just too many things, and this was prior to Google. If you were just even Google the stuff that no one would know. And so it seems like for yourself, that similar trajectory. Interestingly enough, as we're recording this, obviously my station is not a political station. We try to bring in unity, but I found it fascinating that one of the presidential candidates, Kamala Harris, had a quote that said, "You didn't just come from a coconut tree; you came from somewhere." And that's more in reference to understanding culture, respecting diversity, understanding that, we weren't just dropped here. We come from somewhere, and the people behind us
Mm,
who
mm,
have sacrificed to get us to where we are. From a deeper perspective, from a spiritual perspective, it's in lockstep with a lot of your work, which I'm sure points clients to that place of origin beyond the human part. What have you gathered in terms of your own research as to where we come from and what we're connected to? Because I would imagine we don't indeed come from a coconut tree. We do come from somewhere. Yeah.
from the eternal coconut tree in
Yeah.
the sky, so to speak. Yeah. Well, obviously, as you probably know, I've been guiding regression for about 30 years, and um, I am in no way anti channels and mediums. In fact, I know some extremely well. I visit with them and ask questions at times, and that sort of thing. But what I love about regression is that, as you well know, I don't give the information to the client. The client gives it to me. And so, and as was the case with one of my original mentors, as you've mentioned, Dr. Michael Newton, it's guiding client after client and looking for the overlap, looking for the sort of cross validation from, if 10 or 15 clients who don't know each other and have no idea what came forward in each other's regressions, if 10 or 15 clients tell you similar things about where do we come from? Why do we come into body? How do we plan our lives? There has to be some validity because they didn't all read the same books, or some
Mhm.
of them never read any books. And that's one of the things I love about regression is that what needs to come forward for the client does come forward. So, um, without going, too far with just this comment or, these answers, as I as I stepped into my regression practice, initially when I was guiding clients and early on I was doing past life regression only, but soon thereafter I trained in between lives regression or soul level or higher self level regression and began to use that type of regression. And uh, the information that the client needed was coming forward, but also I started seeing this morphing of content that apparently my guides wanted me to learn. One of those pieces of content pertains to um, what are it's always weird to put this into just kind of everyday straightforward language. From where in the celestial realm do the souls that come to earth from, from whence do they come? Where do they come from in the universe? Um, some are souls that incarnate primarily on earth.
Mm.
And then there is a sizable number of souls that come into body on earth that primarily don't incarnate on earth. They come from somewhere in the celestial realm, usually inside of the solar system that we as humans call the solar system. They come from somewhere that is not tied to the frequency of earth. And if they come to Earth, they come from healthy places in the celestial realm, and they bring that healthy way of life, that healthy those healthy values. They bring that perspective to Earth to aid humanity. So I started learning, probably 8 years into my regression practice about what I call interplanetary souls.
Wow. So not only was this first groundbreaking for you, but as a practitioner, there was an evolution that you saw in yourself where you're thinking, okay, I'm trained this way to get people into past lives, but all of a sudden, maybe while I'm doing this, people are talking about other things that I didn't see coming. So that must have been completely, again, eye opening for yourself that there is just so much more unraveling here. Once I think I have a grasp on this stuff, something else comes. So amazing. But for my viewers who are curious, there's a lot of, I'm sure, influence in what people feel about other galaxies. Certainly, information has a big correlationship with beliefs, and most of our information comes from mass media or cinemas or movies. And so, do you find an incongruency with what you've seen in terms of these intergalactical existences versus maybe the public opinion, or is there more symmetry with what the public perceives as, what you call UFOs or intergalactical civilizations and what you have found in your direct interactions with clients?
Yeah, I mean, I'll say no rather than just sense. What I know that my guides want me to do with, learning about some souls incarnate regularly on Earth, some souls don't incarnate regularly on Earth, but at times do come to Earth. Um, uh, I think it's twofold why, um, certain clients are basically guided, to have a regression. One is because some of these peoples slash incarnate souls, some of them are not souls that have been in body on earth many times. Therefore, they're always quite evolved as a soul, but they struggle with from minor to major health issues, emotional issues, fitting into society. And yet along with that, in my opinion, sadly, there's a lot of talk on, all kinds of public circles and that sort of thing, that we should be afraid or worried about the danger of, these aliens that come to Earth. I don't find that these people are dangerous in any
Mm,
way, other than they struggle within themselves to cope with knowing they're different. They're always quite advanced in one way or the other. So, I I came to understand I was to learn, more about interplanetary souls, and, just for your listeners, Jacob, people can exchange that term with starseed, ET souls, whatever term fits. I was just taught to call them
right.
interplanetary souls. Um, they're not dangerous, and they need to understand why they're here and for what reason they feel different than a lot of other people.
Mm, mm. And do you feel they're not here to harm, but to help? You know, was that certainly, yeah.
That's
uh,
the only reason they're here, is in one way or another, whether it's, small circle and helping one person at a time, or helping a family member, or, or an animal. A lot of times interplanetary souls are very comfortable with animals when they're not comfortable with humans. And then other times, they're on larger platforms and stages to aid others.
yeah. It's just that same playbook is what humanity does with what they don't know. I feel evolved beings look at it with curiosity,
Mhm.
interest, openness. And people who have a very closed minded box tend to other those things. We see that in race, religion, things that aren't in our exact wheelhouse, we tend to other. And I think the world has to be more open to expand their box to allow a change and metamorphosis to happen. But yeah, a lot of people are fearful and they just kind of would rather know what they know than open themselves to unknown forces. And that's why there's a big resistance going on, in a dichotomy with those that are open and those that are still kind of closed.
Right. Yes, and not to I agree with you that, this is not a political show or a show where, you and I are, promoting some kind of policy or candidate, but when we see the wide spectrum of what's going on now on our planet with, we have someone, in my opinion, who was brave enough to step out of the race, you know, kind of fits the mold of senior statesman, white person, and basically handing the responsibility of the likely candidacy over to someone who's female, multiracial, younger. Um, all that needs to fit in our culture from A to Z.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, the inclusivity component needs to be a factor. And I always say we have this planet without people who weren't daring enough to just challenge the notion of flat Earth, we would not be living in the same world today. And that's the case physically. Imagine how it's like with these unseen forces.
Yeah.
And yes, it takes courage to expand your box, it takes humility, but it's also quite rewarding as well. As we both, I'm sure, work in the mental health field, regarding in between life and past life regressions, what have you seen regarding correlationships regarding mental health and, possible carryover of past lives, in terms of the work that you've done? And how could that help someone on someone's mental health journey,
Mm.
to be able to visit these things? What's the significance
Yeah,
and importance behind it?
I mean, that's an awesome question, Jacob. Well, it reminds me of a particular client, and so I'll say just a little bit about this client in a very camouflaged way, but I work with many people like this. I'm thinking about a particular female client. She's probably late 40s to early 50s, growing up because she was talked to very overtly by her spiritual guide, and she had a certain amount of struggle and emotional issues with how to cope with that. She ended up being labeled and actually being, hospitalized for a short period of time as an inpatient in a mental health facility. And, she was labeled with all kinds of, as you would imagine and you would understand, psychological diagnoses.
Mhm,
Um, she's not psychotic. She's, those labels didn't fit. And of course, you and I again being trained in conventional ways and then expanding into broader perspective, it took this woman years to come to understand that these quote unquote voices were not some type of abnormality. They were guides and past life circumstances. In some elements of her experience were past lives not on earth that
wow.
were unresolved. Today, this woman that I'm thinking about is a mental health practitioner. She has 2 master's degrees. She's
Wow.
beautifully in her work. She's a very grounded woman, but she didn't understand, and she's also an interplanetary soul. So until she could, sort of categorize and we might say slot in a cognitive understanding of what this was all about, even she herself thought there was something, dramatically abnormal about her.
Hmm. Wow. That's an amazing transformation, and I always just wonder how many potential healers, mediums, intuitives were stigmatized, and they felt like they were drowning. Where the mental health professionals and people have just kind of buried them even further into their own demise. and you just kind of wonder how big of a ripple effect those individuals could have had if the education was there, if the
Mm.
empowerment was there, if, we were able to kind of just give a voice to what they said instead of shutting out their voice. But that's a beautiful story. I'm so grateful to hear these kind of stories that brings tears and a smile to my face. So thank you for sharing that.
Yes, and I think that if some of this information was somewhat more mainstream, then, as you say, some of this stigmatizing, wouldn't be occurring. So, I'm sure it's part of your purpose, it's part of my purpose, to sort of bring certain things out of the closet and we as humans to stop thinking that people should fit into a picture frame of being all having similar characteristics and that makes them okay versus not okay.
Yeah. Well, I think people need to start evolving consciousness and how they understand things. In our world, throughout the school systems, our intelligence is largely predicated on our left brain to just kind of make sense over what's presented. And with this stuff, I do believe our ability to understand is dependent on our level of awareness of consciousness. It has nothing really to do with the left brain. And so, as people evolve, kind of like that analogy in the apartment, the more floors you go up in that apartment complex, the more you could see. And hopefully, people could continually rise and ascend within their different professions. So,
Mm.
obviously, yeah, thank you for sharing that. But would you say past life awareness also gives more of a why? Because I'm a scientific guy, I believe if you look at things closely enough, there's an explanation. Is that something that you found for your clientele where they've been able to have that aha moment to just say, wow, I get it now?
Yes, I mean, let me see if I can keep all this in my brain so I can follow 2 lines of comment, about past lives because I think there's a couple of pieces that would really be useful.
Yeah.
Yes, I mean, certainly for me, and I happen to be an earth-based soul, so because I'm an earth-based soul, I've been here lots of times, and even for myself personally, I understand the me of today, knowing about a fair number of my past lives. I understand why I have certain interests, why I have certain worries, but I think I mean, because you do this type of work yourself, it's like it's kind of like a key in a lock. It's just like, oh, okay, so this is what happened in a past life. This is not true of me, but I'll use this as an example. I was an 18-year-old soldier in the Civil War, and I'd married young and I had a wife and a baby at home and parents that didn't want me to go to war. And why am I so afraid of dying young? And I was that 18-year-old soldier on a Civil War battlefield that died in one of those battles. As well as another quick thought that comes to my mind is when I guide past life regression, um, I always guide it all the way to the final scene, all the way to the death scene. And, technically, and in quotes, we close the life because most of us probably have some lives where we didn't resolve certain feelings. So if in the regression we go all the way to the point of the transition, the physical transition out of the body, then that usually assists the release of that life. So yes, I think understanding past lives is enormously helpful. The other just quick comment I was going to make is when I'm guiding the longer regression that I guide, a between life soul regression, and that's past life leading to working at the soul level, even when my guidance and my words, as I support the client and facilitate the client, even when my words are, and now we're, blah, 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 but I won't give all the words, but, now we're going to go to an important past life scene.
Mm,
If my client isn't earth based, then at times, not all the time, but if my client is interplanetary, no
mm,
matter what my words are, my client will automatically go directly to the soul level.
Hmm.
And that's because the guide of the client doesn't see any need to take the client to a past life. And often that interplanetary soul client doesn't have a lot of lives on Earth. And that's another reason it's not important to access um, a past life. And so it's like, as I say to people, it's like I'm just the driver of the bus. I get the client in the bus, I get the bus started, the bus of regression, and I get the bus on the road, and I try to keep the bus from falling off the shoulders
Mhm.
of the highway. But the itinerary of the bus isn't up to me. It's up to
Wow.
the client's soul and their guides where we go. And I love that because I'm not in charge.
Mm.
It's not my job to come up with the content. So, yeah,
Yeah.
that happens a lot, actually.
Yeah. Well, it's very freeing and unencumbered to take that control away and to give it back to the client and their guides and their higher selves. And so many people, unfortunately, are just they don't feel like they have control. They're controlled by other memories, other lifetimes, things that they don't know.
Yeah.
And what I love about your work is it's kind of like that scene from Good Will Hunting. I'm sure you've seen at the end where you're able to kind of allow clients to understand that it is not your fault. It is
Mm,
not your fault. This
mhm.
pain that you feel, this trauma that you have, it is not your fault. But finding ways to work through that is significant. And with those painful memories, I'm sure you're able to guide them, through the wound. There may still be a scar, but we're able to heal, walk forward, and to be more present in this life instead of regurgitating something that isn't in the groove of the CD of this life.
Yeah. I mean, I always know that, I'm the conduit. I'm not the omnipotent, all-knowing, you know, psychologist, regression therapist. I'm the conduit that spirit's going to use
Mm.
to hopefully assist the client to learn what they need to learn, and that takes a lot of having been a conventional psychotherapist for a long time, it takes a lot of the responsibility off my shoulders.
Right, right. A lot. Yeah, yeah. It's very empowering for certain. And I think the beauty also about past life regression is clients who follow my near death experience often say, "Hey, you've had a near death experience. I can't have this directly. How do I know I'm eternal?" And when clients come to yourself, myself for these regressions, they have a direct experience of the expansiveness of the soul and how the soul goes through in and out of lifetime and how death of itself is a fiction. And I'm sure that's certainly a byproduct of their own belief systems after they certainly work with yourself, that they are having a different framework of the expansiveness of the soul and the eternity of the soul.
Mm, mm, yeah, I mean, totally. I work with clients to, help them even in their everyday life to have an overt connection with their higher self, to have an overt connection with their soul energy. That, of course, because as I'm sure you know, we don't bring 100% of our soul energy into our body, and our higher self has roles and responsibilities um, to do coordination work and guide work from the higher realm. And so it's always we as the incarnate aspect of our soul, we assist and support the work that our higher self, our soul does in the higher realm. It's also vice versa. So it works both directions. I teach people to talk with their higher self, to ask questions and ask for help from both their higher self and their guide, because we have this ongoing relationship with higher self and guides. And for some souls, especially interplanetary and angelic souls, oftentimes their primary spiritual guide is their higher self.
Wow.
Yeah.
Very hard for some though, and I'm sure because for most of us from day one, we're taught that information, power, awareness, knowledge is not inside of us. We're a blank canvas. It's outside of us in the hands of someone else.
Mm,
And so this is such a different dichotomy that you're presenting with clients that says, hey, you have the answers. You and your awareness, your higher self has that. And so it's awkward, I'm sure, for people who start to do this, but I'm sure rewarding to kind of change the direction that they're
mm,
facing in their lives instead of looking externally for everything to start to turn within. That's a beautiful position to view life in.
And I mean, you use the word awkward, that's so true, and it was awkward for me in the beginning too, because obviously I was sort of raised in that kinda standard picture frame of, we're done to, and we're, controlled by, and that sort of thing, so I've gone through that same process myself.
Yeah. This is very spiritually empowering, fascinating conversation, certainly. Obviously, in life, there's subjectivity, there's a personalization to life. I think that's what draws people away from religion to spirituality. We're not going to knock on religion, but religion, again, collective belief system. And I think with spirituality, it's more of that personal connection to
Mm.
some higher power, to some depths in life. Now, when you work with the client, I'm sure there's personalization of their own journeys. But collectively, I get this asked to me all the time. Each time I'm posed it, I try to have a better way of viewing it. Why do we incarnate on a general premise? I'm sure there's subjective basis, but in terms of why do people reincarnate, have you found like some type of collective answer that through your, wealth of experience and research that maybe kind of answers that question?
Yeah, I mean, at the risk of sounding like I know, I've asked that question many times, and I think it's quite clear. So I'm not anti-religion either, and I was very much raised in a religion. I was raised in a pretty strongly Jewish family. Um,
Right back at you.
Yes, I think I either I know that or I thought that, so
Yeah.
yes, and, my mother would when she was alive, would lovingly say, once she learned what kind of work I was doing, "Well, honey, that's not the Judaism we taught you," and it's like, "It's okay, mom, it's okay." Um, yes, there's a kind of I'll call it a mystique of, God is perfect, the soul is perfect, there's a some high frequency that is perfect, and that's in many circles, that's a belief. My understanding for years and years from lots of clients is that, um, the soul comes comes into body to evolve, to advance, to grow. It's like going to school, the child goes to school somewhere around kindergarten age and is, in most states and most countries is required to be educated for a certain number of years. Um, the soul is the only way, this is what I've learned out of a lot of regressions, the only way that humanity will expand and evolve is for the souls that are in body on earth to continue evolving through the choices they make in their lives. And so, in extremely just kind of make it overly simple, we come into body to learn and grow and gain a broader, more humble perspective of how to live life in the healthier ways.
Yeah. I love that. And would you say the DNA of evolution is rooted in collective love or this type of we consciousness versus me consciousness? Is that kind of it? Or, I mean, how would you describe evolution? Because obviously there's a physical evolution, which we know about, but from a spiritual evolution, I'm just wondering the genesis or the core of what evolution is all about.
Yeah, a couple of thoughts about that. So one is that what I've learned over all these years of regression is that there are essentially three, I call it soul origin. There are three types of souls, or the origination of those souls. There are three different types of souls that come into body on earth. And one of those types of souls comes from the angelic realm, and those are what I call angelic realm souls. So some of my clients are souls that aren't earth based and aren't interplanetary, but are angelic realm souls. The souls that make up the community of angelic realm souls are souls that support source, are souls that sort of belong to the, you might say, the energy of source, and they're ambassadors of source energy. And there are no words are really insufficient, but source energy is essentially love, compassion, humility, equality, caring for all people, all living things. So when I work with a client who's an angelic realm soul, and often the client doesn't know that before the regression,
Mm.
um, then the whole notion of what are, I mean, I think, to sort of boil down the intention of coming into body and the intention of humanity to progress, it's to stop pigeonholing people based on, lifestyle, ethnicity, where they were born, what they look like, how they live their life. And of course, we haven't reached that point, for sure.
Yeah. It's funny, and I rarely share this, Linda, but in my near death experience, one of the things that I saw was people around me surrounding me, but I saw them through such a different prism. I saw that, much like Wayne Dyer would say, you take an orange, you squeeze an orange out, you get orange juice. At our core, at our phyla, whatever you want to call it, a divine spark, just a sacredness to us, but at our core, we all are one. And
Mm,
oneness does not mean sameness, but I
mm,
just saw that we are all infinite spirits and so much more than these kind of boxes and labels that we just place people in based off of several factors. I mean, socioeconomic status has a lot to do with the level of respect sometimes that we have towards someone. And when people accumulate things, and I think what you're saying is in lockstep with what I saw in my NDE, that we have to start seeing people through a different lens and start to get to their
mm, mm.
spirit centers versus the surface of what's presented and how we kind of hold people in our own kind of labeling and box.
Yes, and it's also kind of related, Jacob, to what you just said. It's my understanding from, again, regression clients, that the bulk of humans on the planet are earth-based souls,
Mm,
and the bulk of humans are earth-based souls that are, if we put soul evolution on a 10-point scale, um, most humans are, probably between a 4 and a 6 on a 10-point scale.
mm,
And the percentage of more advanced souls on the planet is moderately small, even though advanced souls, particularly advanced earth-based souls, can have more than one incarnation simultaneously. So that, you know, increases that population to a point. Um, but, you know, we're working here on this planet, um, doing what we agreed to do, hopefully, to expand greater acceptance
mm.
of people.
Yes. And so it's not all just fixed. We have the ability to kind of like accelerate our soul level and to kind of go up into a different
Mm,
type of stratosphere, to the angelic or, intergalactic.
mhm.
Um, but yeah, that's really cool. I don't know about you, but like in almost every single like workshop that I go to, I talk to someone about past lives, and what they'll say is, "Oh, this is my last lifetime," and they'll always say that. But I mean, is there like a script for like making sure that this is our last lifetime? Because it seems
Yeah.
like there's a lot of fatigue that people have of being here. And, so I'm
Yeah.
wondering, like, if there's like a formula to make sure that this is our
Yeah.
last journey, or, some people elect to come here, like Mother Teresa. I don't think she necessarily needed to be here, but she was there to serve. And so I'm wondering, like, how do we graduate their school? Is there
Yeah. I mean, w w the assumption that people make is, if this is my last lifetime,
Mm,
then when this life is over, then I'm done. Then, as I jokingly say to people, I get to go watch movies and,
mhm,
drink beer and eat pizza or, whatever.
right,
And uh, i- in my humble opinion, that's a complete fallacy.
mm,
That our soul, and I know this to be true because I've heard about it so many times. Our soul, our higher self, or our soul, if we're not in body at all, if we're not incarnate at all, our soul has responsibilities in the higher realm, because that's a place of coordination and intention to expand humanity, and in other ways, from a broader perspective, to expand the universe.
mhm,
So even if, and it's generally not our last incarnation, but even if it is, that doesn't mean we get to, like, lay around at a spa and
right.
have a massage all day long, or whatever.
Yeah, well, we have certainly a culture obsessed with retirement. It seems like everything is built on that. So
Right.
what you're saying is you can retire from your job and, get your pensions and whatever, but you can never retire from the soul. The soul goes on. You, I'm sure, could rest and stuff like that, but we're of service. And my
Yeah.
last question before we get into your incredible books and ways to contact you is, I know you mentioned the life in between lives. And obviously, this could be a whole segment in itself. But for viewers, I'm sure they're familiar right now with past lives. Life between lives, a little bit different. What have you kind of learned about life between lives, and what could viewers understand about that in its significance to their awareness and their journeys?
Yeah, well, life between lives, and of course, so that term was coined and written about by Dr. Michael Newton, um, and and I still use that term in my work, but it's a bit of a confusing term
Mhm,
because it implies that there's this specific time and space between, incarnation to incarnation. And between what I call between life soul regression simply means that the regression includes past life and then working at the client's soul level.
mm,
So, um, uh, I mean, many pieces of information are possibilities of what comes forward in that type of in the between life soul regression. It's a combination of things like, who are my primary spiritual guides? What is my soul doing, even, when I'm in body? Um, who are the souls that I incarnate with most often?
mm,
Um, how did I plan my current life? What were the circumstances, and how did the details of my life, like, mother, father,
mm,
ethnicity, what circumstances were pre-planned?
mm,
And then, of course, we have free will when we're here. So the content of what comes forward in a between life soul regression is like almost like a thumbprint of the client. It's going to be different depending on the client, and almost always the client will learn, do I usually incarnate on earth?
mm,
Do I only seldom incarnate on earth? And if so, where do I come from? And what's it like where I come from? What are the skills? What's the way of life? Do I come from a place where souls have children? Do I come from a place where I have a particular client I've worked with more than once? She's an interplanetary soul. She comes from a place where the souls remain childlike in a healthy way, permanently.
Hmm.
And so this is a woman who happens to be a highly intelligent medical doctor, and she wondered why she had these inclinations at times to do things that were not in an unhealthy way, but to do healthy things that a child would do. So
Uh-huh.
clients learn that kind of thing.
Wow. So it just gives people a deeper awareness to understand the why, which fascinates me. And the last question that I have before we get to your books is, if we were meant to remember all this stuff, why wouldn't we? Why is there a veil of forgetfulness that people have if we're meant to hold on to this? Are we meant to forget it and then remember it, or how does that kind of go?
Well, and so, the analogy is, why don't we just come into body having the knowledge that someone graduating from high school has? Why do we have to go from grade 1 to 12? Because life is not meant to be just an, I mean, again, this, I'm sure. We have to work at growing and evolving and work at learning. um, if it was all just laid out there, we wouldn't have challenges that sort of catapult our evolution.
Yeah. What's the point of the test if you get all the answers? And
Right.
what's the point of being here if you're just having spiritual awareness? As we're spiritual being having a
Exactly.
human experience. Very well said.
Yeah.
Last question. Let's talk about your books. I know you're like myself. You've written multiple books. Um, what are kind? I know there's several of them that could be a whole episode in itself. What are some of the major themes of your books, and where could people, be able to find some of those books if should some of the information that are in the books call to my viewers?
Yeah, yeah. My books are all written with client material because I feel like it's the clients that do the teaching. So they're
Mhm.
filled with client regression material. My books can be found on Amazon, as well as if people go to my website, you can order any of my books through our website.
Mhm.
Um, the third book that I wrote, Souls on Earth, is all interplanetary soul material. I have a new book that is finished and is in the
Wow.
slow, gradual publication cycle that will be available in 2025. People ask me about angelic soul material. There will be a fair amount of angelic realm soul material in that book. So, Amazon, my website, are places to find that. I'll be teaching. I haven't taught a live regression training course since pre COVID. So this fall, live online, I'll be teaching the basic level of regression, and then next spring, the second level. And so people can find any and all of that on my website.
Yes, and remind viewers, I know this is going to be in the comments section, but your website is
So all run together. It's Raven, like the bird, Raven, ravenheartcenter.com.
love it. Dr. Linda Bachman, thank you for coming on, sharing your beautiful wisdom of past lives in between life regressions, talking about all things of the soul. Is there any last messages that you have, or you feel comfortable having a mic drop at this time? And I know you shared so much. We'd love to obviously have you back on, but I'm wondering any last messages that are coming to you through your guides or through your awareness, or you feel content at this time.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would just close, Jacob, by saying to people, trust your intuitive. You may think you're not, but you are. Trust your inclinations. Talk to your higher self, and trust your higher self is right there to guide and support you.
Trust your intuition, trust yourself. Dr. Linda Bachman, thank you for coming on. We'd love to have you back on anytime. And I strongly encourage my viewers to check out Linda's website, upcoming courses, as well as her upcoming book, which I'm very excited to see and read myself. Thank you for your generous time and your beautiful words.
Thank you, Jacob, and good luck with what you're doing. It's been an honor and a pleasure.
Thank you. Well, that was a wonderful conversation. Enjoyed it thoroughly, and I hope you did as much as I did as well. Dr. Bachman was able to really bring forth a lot of profound information on regression therapy to help us navigate and better understand the souls, its different categories, and who we are and why we're here. So, thank you all for tuning in to my wonderful interview with Dr. Bachman. Please consider hitting that subscribe button to help a growing channel, as well as follow me now on mindbodyspirit.fm to view my channel in the audio version across all major platforms. This is Jacob Cooper signing off from here. Thank you all for tuning in on the Wisdom Jacob's Ladder for this week's episode. We'll see you soon.